Hey everybody, welcome back to another van build episode. Last week we started installing vinyl plank flooring in our van.
It's something we've never done before, and with flooring there are many options.
Should you install it first or last?
Leave it floating or glue it down.
A solid sheet or planks?
And for crying out loud, which color?
If you're considering doing this in your own van, you can do it. If we can do it, you can do it.
And keep watching. We'll share with you the many mistakes we made and some of the tips that we've learned along the way.
Last week, after much planning and measuring, we finally started cutting out the step in our subfloor. Look at that.
Wow.
And we started installing our vinyl plank flooring.
Today we'd like to take some time to share with you what we've learned so far.
Tip number 1, install flooring last. When we first started working on the van build, I was convinced that we needed to do the flooring first because that's what we saw everyone else do on YouTube. But Steve convinced me otherwise, and I'm glad now that's the case. The first thing is it's a lot cheaper to do it last. You need a lot less flooring, so that's less money.
Another thing, like Audra mentioned before, was if you put it in last, you have less chance of damaging the floor. We have found already, just moving a couple things in and out, that it is easy to damage the floor. And by doing it last, it's easy to swap out if you ever want to change up your flooring design or if something gets damaged.
Tip number 2, plan ahead. Before we did our flooring, we spent a lot of time looking around at different options. We looked at the sheet vinyl, we looked at bamboo, all kinds of things. And we settled on knowing that we wanted the vinyl plank. It's important to know kind of what you want beforehand, how much you need, just so you're prepared when you get started. So just some things that we found are worth mentioning. You might not think about is that the size of the planks, if you go with vinyl plank flooring, is important. So this is the size that we went with. We can give you the dimensions in the description. We also had purchased and tried some other flooring, and it was wider than this and longer. And in such a small space, we found that that would not work well at all because it really limits what you can do for the design and layout in the floor, and it would have looked really stupid, we think. The other thing is the quality. So this is just from Lowe's. It's not anything super special, but we looked at the specs, and I don't know if you can see here, but there's different layers in the flooring. There's a top layer, and a lot of times this is not very thick. And then there's the core, and then there's this like rubber padding on the bottom. Again, this isn't very thick, and the other stuff we had was probably even thinner than this. And just taken it out of the box, there was some kind of particle or dust in there, and it scratched. And we could immediately see, remember that, like down below this surface, and we could tell if it scratched that easily and that noticeably, we didn't want it. So what we suggest is getting some samples, or even buying some different boxes, bringing them home, putting them out in the van, and testing them out. I wouldn't suggest trying to scratch the stuff from the store, but at least with the samples, to take something and just see how this surface holds up. The next thing to think about is color. So we know that we like dark wood. The problem with that, though, is that anything that gets on here is going to show up, like when it's darker. So we would have actually liked a darker color, but knowing, that was the likelihood that stuff would show up, we actually kind of compromised, and we got something that had some lighter tones to help with that. So, light wood might be a little bit better for some things, but then if you go too light, you might have like darker dirt that shows up. So just think about that. Think about your needs, and that's important to keep in mind. And that's what we recommend thinking about before you get started. Tip number 3, decide your pattern before you start cutting. So I would say one of the most important things is to decide your floor pattern before you start cutting the wood. And also when you're trying to figure out like how many boxes you're going to need, especially if you care about the cost. So something that I did, I took the size of one plank and I made a sketch and then put it on the computer and kind of did a layout of all the pieces, trying to think through once we cut them how they'd all fit together so we could minimize our cost and only have to do 2 boxes versus more boxes. So just to kind of give you an example, this piece doesn't have the edging, but let's just say this has like a tongue or what would the other thing?
Lip.
The lip. Once you cut the piece, obviously you've got just this flat side here, so you can't hook it together with anything else. So what I did is I figured having one long piece, cutting it in the middle, those middle cuts have to go up against the wall, and then the lip and the tongue have to go up against the next piece. So I did this whole diagram to try to maximize how we were using the materials and to make sure the pattern looked nice and everything worked well. And that was an invaluable tool. I don't know how someone does it without. I feel like we would just ended up with a mess and we probably would have had to get another box. So that was something that was very helpful for us in the process.
Tip number 4, allow your floor to float. Most manufacturers recommend that you put a 1/4 inch gap around the flooring to allow it to expand and contract. We did pretty well with that, except for the very front edge. I just got ahead of myself and I put down the trim right through the flooring. We're hoping that doesn't cause a problem down the road, but if it does, I know that I just have to pop up that piece of stair trimming, make adjustments, and then put the trimming back down.
So we don't know if it was necessary or not to leave that gap around the edging, but that's what the professionals said. We did talk to some other people who built out their vans. They've not left that edge, and so far it's been okay. Seems to be kind of a controversial thing, just like insulation in the van. We decided to do it just to kind of err on the side of caution. I think what happens is, like with a bigger house, there's probably more need, when you have more planks in a row for the expansion and contraction. In such a small area like this, I can't see that it's going to make, expand and contract that much. But we left that anyway, and hopefully that'll help. What we did is our plan was on the slider side here to nail that down, so we had something that was kind of secure in place, so nothing, couldn't shift around, and then to leave kind of the space for the expansion and contraction on the back side of it. Does that make sense? Am I explaining that well? If that makes sense. That was our whole plan. And then because there'd be a gap, we wanted to do the quarter round on top of it. So, like Steve said, we did end up nailing 2 sides, which kind of defeats the purpose of trying to leave it, have that space to expand and contract, and we'll have to get back to you in a few months to see if anything has changed or if it all looks good or what the outcome is. So that's it. Those are our tips. The next thing we want to show you, finishing the step and the edging. When we were getting ready to do our flooring, we couldn't find videos anywhere that really showed well like how people edged the flooring once it was down. We saw everybody doing the flooring itself and the planks, but not the edging and finishing. So we spent a lot of time trying to figure that out. I think Steve did an awesome job. I know he felt like it was kicking his butt at times, but I think he did an awesome job. So we're going to show you now how we did that.
So I've been working on the edging for the floor, and the learning curve has been quite steep. I first started trying to use a jigsaw with a metal blade, and that was just chewing this stuff up like you wouldn't believe. Then I tried using a metal tin snips, and that was also kind of bending the metal weird. Now I'm trying a miter saw. I think that's going to work, but I'm just having a tough time trying to figure out the angles and how best to cut it. I bought a 12-foot section of this, and I'm guessing I'm going to have to buy another section because I've simply used up too much of this learning how best to make the cuts. So, live and learn. Thankfully, it's only like $15 for a section. I don't like to waste money, but I guess there's worse things I could have done, worse mistakes I could have made. Anyway, live and learn. Here we go.
Today's objective is to permanently install the stair edging. So that doesn't happen. They look like this. And I'm going to use a little bit of painter's tape on the screw head to protect it from the hammer. Might be a little bit of overkill, but I'd rather not mark up the screw.
While Steve's out finishing up the metal edging, I'm gonna quick touch up this quarter round. I'm gonna give it a coat of paint, and then I'm gonna touch up some spots out in the van, and then we're gonna get this baby finished. And I've called in the reinforcements. All right, you gonna help, Kitty? Huh? You gonna help?
So while I'm working on the floor trim, Audra is practicing her Picassoing.
Yeah. I'm gonna be the next great artist. World renowned.
Van Gogh. See what I did? So what I'm doing is nipping off this corner right here so these two pieces will sit together, and I'll show you that here in a second.
So this is the finished step, and as I was saying, I think Steve did an awesome job on this. A few things that I've noticed with his craftsmanship here is I know he worked hard to line up the holes so it's kind of symmetrical and even all along here, like evenly spaced. So I think it's important to think about that when you get started with the edging. And if you look down here, what we did, we took the flooring that was left over, the scraps, and we used them to kind of finish the front of the step. And you know, you can see what a nice job he did with all the corners. And then we have a little cubby in here where we can put shoes. So I'm pretty thrilled with how it's turned out. I think Steve did a great job in finishing these edges. We had put a lot of thought into the size of the step. We didn't want to take up too much space in the floor. We like it all open, and we like to be able to use it for things. And it's pretty perfect for sitting here. And I can put my feet up, or obviously getting in and out of the van. I give it 5 cans for sure. last week we shared that we scratched one of our pieces as we were cutting. So after doing that, we actually tried some different products on some scrap vinyl pieces. We actually put some scratches in there, and then we tried some different things to see what would be best to touch up scratches, which we think is a good thing to know since it's easy to scratch these floors. We tried these markers, we tried some polyurethane, and I have this kind of matte varnish polyurethane that I use for crafting, and I used it for the ceiling in here, and we're going to actually use that. We thought that would be the best for touching up the scratch. So I'm going to do that now, and then we'll show you how it turns out. Alright. So using a little itty bitty paintbrush, trying to put just a tiny bit of this on. We had found that if we got the scratch wet, it didn't show up as much, so this is kind of doing the same thing, hopefully. Here's the scratch part, and here it is touched up. It's not dry yet, but I'm assuming this is what it'll look like, so can you see a difference? So we've been showing you bits and pieces of the floor. Now it's time for the big reveal. Check it out. And let us know what you think.